Do you feel like the US has become the world's police force? Do you wonder how we went from George Washington strongly advocating for a policy of neutrality in foreign affairs to the US launching a precision airstrike on 3 Iranian nuclear sites? Today, and over the next couple of weeks, I want to examine the evolution of the United States' stance on foreign intervention from the Spanish-American War to today.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
You're not hurting anybody with force, fraud, coercion, theft, or violence. Your life is your life, your body is your body, your business is your business, and your property is your property. It's not mine, and it sure as hell is not the federal government's.
This is a very large topic, and I initially thought I could pack it all into one video. But as I began researching and writing, I quickly realized that to do the story justice, it couldn't be told in a 15 to 20 minute video. So in this video, I will cover American foreign policy and interventions from the 1890s to 1945. I try to stay out of the weeds of describing specific battles and stick to how we became involved in foreign conflicts and the aftermath of those conflicts. These are all very interesting topics, and I highly suggest doing your own research into them. For its first century, the U.S. largely avoided foreign entanglements, focusing on domestic growth and westward expansion. However, the late 19th century marked a significant shift that set us on the course we find ourselves on today. For years, Cuban revolutionaries had been fighting for independence from Spain. Many Americans felt a kinship with the Cubans' struggle against a colonial power. Others, like Theodore Roosevelt, believed in American expansionism, thinking a war with Spain presented an opportunity to acquire new territories. American businesses also had significant investments in Cuba, and the ongoing instability threatened these interests. Things escalated further on the night of February 15, 1898, when the USS Maine, an American second-class battleship, exploded and sank in Havana Harbor. The devastating explosion killed 266 of its 354 crew members. The ship had been sent to Havana in January 1898 to protect American interests. On April 25, 1898, the U.S. formally declared war on Spain. Spain had already declared war on the U.S. the previous day. The conflict was remarkably short, lasting only about 4 months from April to August. U.S. Secretary of State John Hay famously called it a splendid little war due to its decisive American victory and relatively low U.S. combat casualties, though many more did die from disease. The Treaty of Paris formally ended the war on December 10, 1898, and had profound consequences. Spain relinquished its claim to Cuba. While the U.S. promised not to annex Cuba, it later gained significant influence over Cuban affairs through the Platt Amendment. Spain also ceded Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States, as well as selling the Philippines to the U.S. for $20 million, leading to the Philippine-American War, a brutal and often forgotten conflict that lasted from 1899 to 1902. Though not directly a result of the war, the U.S. also annexed the independent state of Hawaii during the conflict, viewing it as a strategic outpost for its growing Pacific interests. The period from 1902 to 1917 saw America focus mostly on domestic affairs. When World War I erupted in Europe in August 1914, President Wilson immediately declared the United States would remain neutral, a stance he would keep for 3 years. Wilson even ran for re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." Despite Wilson's desire for neutrality, a series of events ultimately pushed the United States into the war. Germany's use of U-boats became a major point of contention, while initially scaling back attacks after the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 and the Sussex in 1916. Germany announced the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare in February of 1917. This meant German U-boats would sink any ship, armed or unarmed, that entered designated war zones, including American merchant vessels. In late January 1917, British intelligence intercepted and decoded a secret telegram from German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmerman to the German ambassador in Mexico. The telegram proposed a military alliance between Germany and Mexico if the U.S. entered the war, promising Mexico the return of lost territories. When this telegram was revealed to the American public, it sparked outrage and solidified anti-German sentiment. Beyond these direct provocations, Wilson framed American intervention as a moral imperative. In his address to Congress requesting a declaration of war on April 2, 1917, he famously stated that the U.S. must fight to make the world safe for democracy. He argued that the war was not merely about specific grievances, but about a fundamental struggle between democratic ideals and autocratic rule. On April 6, 1917, Congress formally declared war on Germany, bringing the U.S. into one of the bloodiest conflicts the world had ever seen. Automatic weapons, poison gas, tanks, and airplanes ripped most of Europe to shreds. While American involvement in the war was short, 116,516 Americans lost their lives. On November 11, 1918, World War I ended, but there was still work to be done. In 1919, Wilson personally led the American delegation to the Paris Peace Conference, becoming the first U.S. president to travel abroad in an official capacity. He was a central figure among the Big Four, alongside the leaders of Britain, France, and Italy, who largely dictated the terms of peace. At the conference, Wilson tirelessly advocated for his 14 points. However, he faced significant opposition from France and Britain, who were primarily interested in punishing Germany and securing their own territorial and economic interests. I will put a link to a video describing Wilson's 14 points in the description. The Treaty of Versailles formally ended the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers. While it incorporated some of Wilson's principles, it was largely a punitive document aimed at Germany. Provisions included Germany losing significant territory in Europe and all of its overseas possessions, the German army and navy being severely restricted in size, and they were forced to accept sole responsibility for the war and its damages, and obligated to pay substantial financial reparations to the Allies. Many believe the harsh treatment of Germany in the Versailles Treaty directly led to Hitler gaining power in the 1930s. Crucially, the Treaty of Versailles included the Covenant of the League of Nations as its first part. Wilson insisted on this, believing that an effective international organization could mitigate the harshness of the treaty and provide a mechanism for future peaceful dispute resolution. The League of Nations was Wilson's brainchild, an international organization designed to provide a forum for resolving disputes, promoting international cooperation, and ensure collective security. The League's core principle was that an attack on one member would be considered an attack on all, prompting a collective response. Despite Wilson's fervent advocacy and the League's inclusion in the Treaty of Versailles, the United States ultimately never joined the League of Nations. This was a devastating blow to Wilson's vision. Critics feared that membership in the League would compromise American sovereignty, entangle the U.S. in European conflicts, and potentially override Congress's constitutional power to declare war. The United States' involvement in World War II was a turning point that fundamentally reshaped the course of the war and the global order. While the war officially began in Europe in September 1939 with Germany's invasion of Poland, the U.S. maintained a policy of neutrality for over 2 years. However, this neutrality was far from absolute. As the war in Europe intensified, President Franklin D. Roosevelt sought ways to aid the Allied powers, particularly Great Britain and France. In 1939, he persuaded Congress to amend the Neutrality Acts to allow for cash and carry sales, meaning belligerent nations could buy U.S. weapons and supplies if they paid in cash and transported them on their own ships. The Lend Lease Act, a monumental piece of legislation, effectively ended U.S. neutrality. Recognizing that Britain was running out of money, it allowed the U.S. to lend or lease war materials to any nation deemed vital to the defense of the United States. This provided essential aid to Great Britain, China, and later the Soviet Union, turning the U.S. into the arsenal of democracy. Even before formal entry, the U.S. Navy conducted neutrality patrols in the Atlantic, often reporting access submarine sightings to British and Canadian navies. Following incidents with German U-boats, Roosevelt issued a shoot-on-sight order in September 1941, effectively engaging in an undeclared naval war in the Atlantic. The Japanese surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, brought an abrupt end to American isolationism. The attack inflicted heavy casualties and severe damage to the Pacific Fleet. A day later, on December 8, 1941, President Roosevelt delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
And Congress declared war on Japan. A few days later, Germany and Italy, allied with Japan under the Tripartite Pact, declared war on the United States, officially drawing the U.S. into the global conflict. The U.S. immediately underwent a massive mobilization effort. Factories were retooled for war production, leading to an economic boom that effectively ended the Great Depression. The country became the primary supplier of arms, ammunition, food, and all other resources for the Allied war effort. Over the next 4 years, 16 million Americans fought and 407,316 Americans lost their lives while retaking Europe from the Nazis and in the island-hopping campaign in the Pacific. World War II definitively ended the period of American isolationism, ushering in an era of active U.S. leadership in global affairs. Yalta represented the high point of wartime cooperation among the Big Three. Roosevelt believed he had secured vital Soviet participation against Japan and laid the groundwork for lasting peace through the UN. However, the agreements regarding Eastern Europe, particularly Poland, were ambiguous enough to allow for differing interpretations, which quickly became a source of major conflict as the Soviet Union solidified its control over the region. Critics later accused Roosevelt of handing over Eastern Europe to Soviet domination. Potsdam marked a significant shift in the Allied relationship. The spirit of cooperation that characterized Yalta had largely evaporated, replaced by open disagreements and a growing sense of ideological divide. Truman's firmer stance, partially influenced by the atomic bomb's existence, signaled a more confrontational approach to Stalin. The unresolved issues, particularly regarding the future of Germany and the nature of governments in Eastern Europe, laid the immediate groundwork for the Cold War, as the Soviet Union consolidated its control over what became known as its sphere of influence, or satellite states. The U.S. played a leading role in the creation of the United Nations, an international organization designed to promote peace and cooperation, reflecting the lessons learned from the failures of the League of Nations. The years 1982 to 1945 saw a huge shift in American politics and foreign intervention. America initially embraced the Monroe Doctrine, which stated that the American continents were henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. This meant no new European colonies could be established in the Western Hemisphere. The United States would consider any attempt by European powers to extend their system to any independent nation in the Western Hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. This effectively warned against European political or military interference in the affairs of independent American states. In return for European non-intervention in the Americas, the United States pledged not to interfere in the existing colonies of European powers in the Americas, nor in purely European affairs or conflicts. This established a concept of separate spheres of influence. This period evolved into America becoming a world superpower and entering 2 European wars, forever shifting the part the U.S. would play on the world stage. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on what we're doing with the channel. And remember, in the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Dwight D. Eisenhower.